by the year 2001, I put out an album called Primary Color. And it was a guitar album. Most people in the industry told me that doing a guitar album was absolutely pointless, that nobody would buy it. It was a niche market, blah, 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 blah. But I put this record together with a great deal of thought and care. Recorded most of it at my own studio. And there was 2 cuts on it that weren't. One was the Rolla Boys Reel. It was recorded by CBC. And the other was a cut that didn't make Now the Work Is Done, which was a Lightfoot cover called Whispers of the North. It was recorded by Gunning at the Wee House of Music. And but other than that, it was a 16-cut album that basically went the entire width and breadth of my love of the instrument. And I dedicated the album to Chet, who died that year. I believe it was that year or the year before. But I remember hearing how I heard Chet passed away. I was at Stan Rogers Festival, of all things, and I was there. It was in the green room. I was wandering around in my stage clothes and drinking a beer and enjoying myself, and people were getting autographs, and I was having the usual good time I had at that festival over the years. And somebody walked up to me and said, I know you're a big fan of Chet Atkins. I said, yes, sir, I sure am. And they said, well, we just heard that he's passed on. And man, that hit me hard. It just did. It's was like losing a family member. That you didn't see all the time in person, but you knew he was there, right? And he had been there in my life for decades, at that point. 2 of them at least. And it's a moment I'll never forget. So when that album came out, it was of great importance to me. And I was still working with Mickey Quays at the Tidemark offices there, and Christine was working there, booking us. And I think she was there then. I can't remember exactly when that started, but I think that's when it started. It's too bad the memory's kind of foggy on a lot of this stuff, because some of the things that happened in my life, in my career, I realized this morning that I've blocked a lot of it out because it was unpleasant. And this is the second run at this particular episode, because I had started another episode altogether and realized that I got a major part of the story wrong. And I realized that the story, the real thing that happened in the story was horrendous, and I didn't want to talk about it. It was worse than, it was bad. The thing I was talking about was bad enough. But then I stopped recording and I thought about it for a second and realized I was wrong about what happened. It was actually worse than what I was saying. And I thought, I'm just going to start again. So here we are, take two. You'll never see take one. And so this album came out and it sold, according to what I was told, it was pressed by, I don't know, one of the labels we were working with. And it sold 10,000 copies in the first week. As far as I was told, that's what they told me, and I was like, "Holy crap!" And I remember one of the workers at Tidemark looked at me and said, "Man, I love working with you because you sell so many records. It's just crazy, right?" And so I was vindicated by that, and I thought, so was Chet. And I look back at the first 15, 16 years of my career, and I think about Chet, because Chet told stories all the time about how he just didn't fit anywhere. He was fired apparently from 17 or 18 jobs before he became Chet Atkins, right? The Chet Atkins. And it was always for the same reason. He played too well. He played too hot, too much. He didn't fit. He was so far above some of these, in musical terms, some of these country acts he was working with, including people like the Carter family and like all these different acts. Like his playing was so sophisticated that even though he was astounding to watch and hear amongst these bands, he didn't fit them. And I think that a lot of the people that worked him early in his career realized that the man was going to be a star. So don't bother keeping him. He's not going to stay anyway. And I saw that happen a lot to people in my time. Happened to me quite a few times where I was like, yeah, we're not going to hire JP because why would we? We might hire him, but he's not going to stay. Somebody else will want him. He'll be leaving in 6 months, and then we got a band with a huge hole in it. And it's true. Like when you have guys that are, multi-instrumentalists and easy to teach and easy to, find things easy to learn and invent new things in a band, you got to make sure that you're hiring band players, not ringers, because ringers will never stay in a band. And so I think about Chet, right? I think, Jesus, I had it easy compared to that. I went through some of the same things that he did, but like he was at the very beginning of the entire industry. He helped create it. And so to see that album do so well, and it still does well to this day. And strangely enough, it's the only guitar album I ever put out, which I intend to rectify, because I think this time I did another one. But it was a labor of love, and as most things were in my career, I'm pretty sure I won an ECMA for that album. I think it was Instrumentalist of the Year or something I won for it. And so that was sort of the beginning of an era, that record, because it was the coming of age of my company, which consisted basically of me and Hilda and Christine. Christine, so Tidemark and Mickey Quays, who I was managing me at the time, that whole infrastructure started to collapse under its own weight, and the changing times, and Napster had started at that time, and online file sharing, and the labels were in a blind panic. And when I first saw Napster, I thought it was brilliant. I thought, man, whoever thought of this, is a real music lover. It's a way for us to hear music that we can't find anymore, or new music we can't afford to buy, or don't want to buy a whole album, just want to hear a single. And And I thought this is fantastic, and I until this to this day, I can truthfully say that online music and online music sales in general have never ever affected me. And as a matter of fact, to the contrary, they've actually increased my live ticket sales because things like Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon Music and these things, they put my songs in front of a billion people, right? Whereas me working even with a company as big as Tidemark and Universal Music and whoever else, they can't put me in front of that many people because nobody wants to hear some Joe Blow guy playing guitar instrumentals because it's not marketable in their world. But Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon Music and Bandcamp and all these different things, they are available to a billion people or more who might be looking for a guy playing Billy in the Lowground, and I turn up in the search. So it makes new audience members, and it makes money. I get paid well from Apple Music. I don't get paid from Spotify, but nobody else does either. So the whole industry, right, was changing, and so Tidemark and Mickey Quays and his whole crew, it started to fold in on itself, and there was, we came to an end in our relationship because of that, and because I just felt that I was too far down the rabbit hole of management, right? I went down that same rabbit hole again where there was bank accounts opened up in my name that they had access to. There was checks being written, checks being cashed, things being done that weren't really being cleared through me, but that's fine because that was the agreement we made. They did nothing that was not in our agreement. But it was still very uncomfortable for somebody who was trying to start I was intent on owning my entire career because I knew it had been done. I'd seen other people do it. Like I'd seen other people who owned all their masters, all their distribution, did their own publicity, had their own booking agent, did their own management. I wanted to do that, and I knew I could. And so Tidemark and Mickey faded out of the picture, and Christine took over everything. And we did that I rented a cheap apartment up in Dartmouth, and on sort of in the poor part of town, and which is sad to say that every city has that. And there's problems up there. Like there's problems everywhere in cities where poverty exists. But we found a nice place in a quiet kind of a neighborhood, but you knew driving in there that it was a rough part of town. People were poor, and there was crime, and but I didn't care because I lived around that all my life. I came out of that same kind of poverty myself in low rental places where, the next door neighbors were everything from hippies to bikers to gangbangers, like before gangbangers even existed. So I didn't care. I was just like, this is a nice enough spot. It's a quiet building. It was like a 6-unit kind of building. And I said, we'll just go in here. And I put a desk and hooked everything up that she needed. There was a bedroom in there in case she ever wanted to crash in there. Well, it was mostly for me and Hilda to crash when we were in town working in Halifax. But it was a nice little spot, did up the kitchen, put a TV in, put a couch in. And Christine worked out of this converted living room every day. I commuted from Halifax to come over there, and she did a fantastic job. It was just, it was actually quite astounding that we achieved what we did so quickly. But she became my booking agent, publicist, manager, tour advance. Like she did everything, and it made us so much money that I ended up putting her on a very good salary. As I've mentioned before, didn't even notice it coming out of my bank account because there was so much money going in that it was just fantastic. But as with most things in my life, in my career, unfortunately. A lot of these people and these things came foul of Hilda. And for whatever reason she had, she would turn on them and just make life unpleasant enough that they either quit or I was forced to fire them because she was making it unpleasant on me to have them around. And she did that all the time, and I don't know why she did it. She just did it. She didn't want anybody, kind of usurping her position in our relationship, and everything threatened her. So that's how she behaved. She would go after people like Christine and like, almost everybody who ever worked with us. And it was just a precarious way to do things. It wasn't good. It wasn't a good way to run a business. Everything was a liability. You weren't sure what she was going to say or do in mixed company with buyers, and little did I know, that there was a serious problem, behind the scenes with her calling me down to people, right? But she thought that she had the right to do that, and so she did it. I don't like, bashing Hilda. I'm not the easiest man to get along with in the world or live with, and I know that, but I mean, there was just, sometimes she had reasons to be mad at me, but most of the time, there weren't. And unfortunately, she didn't have a lot of filters. I don't have them either, really. And but she didn't have any at all, and would say things and do things that were just completely over the top and uncalled for, and had a lot of suspicion and a lot of, always thought the worst of people, and that's a dangerous way to be, combined with the fact that I was distrustful of people, and her, in the background fostering all of that made things worse for me. Would set off my alarm bells on people that didn't require alarm bells. And so things went on for a time like that, with Christine in there working her butt off. But I remember I witnessed one day Hilda, she went after Christine for something that was completely innocent on her part, basically because she had made a phone call to find out if I was living or dead, because I was broke down on the road somewhere. And somehow that was a terrible infraction. Hilda had come out to get me wherever I was. I was on my way into Halifax. She went and come and got me. And we went back to the office, and Hilda immediately tore into Christine for 20 minutes over this, you keep your hands off my husband, like, you don't call to check up on my husband. And it went way out of reach. There was just no rhyme or reason to how this went. It was a phone call that Christine made to make sure I was alive, that I was all right, that somebody was coming to get me. Hilda found out about this, and suddenly there was something untowards going on, which was the furthest thing from the truth. And I don't even know how it led to that. I don't even know how that, except it's just that Hilda just wasn't pleased with the fact that I had to talk to this woman every day, sometimes for an hour or more a day, because we were planning all the work I was doing, all the records we were selling, all the distribution we were building. We were getting records. I was one of the first people in the industry to ever distribute my own records successfully, where the albums were going out into stores, and I was getting vendor numbers from chains, and I was just about to get a vendor number for Walmart before it all fell apart, but that's another story. But it was just really hard. And so, being, Christine, I got to give it to her. I mean, obviously, she, even after all that, she just put her head down, went to work. She never let it get her down. She tried not to let it get her down. I'm sure it did at times, but and I would often be in the sad position of being in some great row with Hilda, and I'd end up, going to the office and sit there, and she became my psychologist, which was pointless because there's nothing she could do, but there was a lot of people around that were saying, if you guys don't get along, why are you together? Like, wouldn't it be better if you just split up for both of you? But I was stubborn, and again, I had built a little empire, right? We had money and property and goods and financial power, I didn't want to lose all that just because I couldn't get along with my wife. I kept trying to make it work I think probably Hilda did too, but it just wasn't working. It wasn't working, and it kept coming out the same way. It would bleed out into relationships that I was having in the band and in the industry, and pretty soon, unbeknownst to me, many people just didn't want to work with me because she was always in the picture. So, because she was my accompanist, I had nobody else half the time because we couldn't keep a bass player because of all the infighting that was going on. So, but there were some comical moments. I had, 18 or 17 or 18 bass players in 14 years. And some of them didn't last long. I remember so this will be a great tribute to a lot of people because I worked with some of the best bass players in the world. After, Jarvis, Dave, Adrian, I met I knew about him, but I went out and I knew a guy named Nigel Way, who is, in my opinion, probably one of the best bass players that ever came out of Canada. His hero was Jaco Pastorius, and he played just like him virtually. He was a genius bass player, and a tremendously nice guy. And he somehow got along with Hilda. It was weird, but he just took all of that in stride. It didn't seem to bother him that much, but he was a strange dude. He was a black belt in judo, and the first time he came down to the old house there that we were renting just before we moved in to the new place, he stayed overnight, and in the morning he'd be up in the middle of the living room floor doing all these judo stretches. And I remember Hilda walking out one morning not knowing he was there, and she looks out, and there he is in his pajamas, all curved up like a backwards crab, like doing all kinds of stretches and rolls and all these exercises. And she didn't know what to think. And of course, she's looking at me going, "Are you kidding me? What's this guy doing?" Right? But Nigel was a tremendous man, and matter of fact, he was. It's hard actually for me to talk about Nigel because it's unfortunate that every one of these episodes that I put out has some. I want to be uplifting in some of this story, but there's so much tragedy in my story, and this is one of them. Not long after Nigel quit us because of money, just wasn't enough work and too much travel. I mean, there was work, but it was too much travel. People get tired of being on the road 300 days a year. So shortly thereafter, there was something went wrong in his life, and I'll just leave it at that. There was something very wrong happened in the man's life, and he shot himself. And I believe me, I felt that to the core as well, as I loved the guy, and uh, there was plenty of things that were said after he died about why he might have done it and all these things. But I and that's fine. That's if those things were true, then they're true. But my personal experience with the man was nothing but pleasant, and his family was great. Um, I don't know what else to say, but there was a man that we lost him out of the band, and then we lost him, out of the world, which is really sad to me, and which leads me to another guy that sadly also passed on, who died of a number of health issues suddenly at a very young age, and his name was Danny Sutherland, and he was perhaps one of the craziest motherfuckers I ever met in my life, and he didn't last long with us because he was insane and funny, and I thought he was hilarious, but Hilda did not. So, to give you an example of how crazy this man was, and I don't mean crazy in a bad way. He was crazy, funny crazy, like over the top, really bizarre humor. Um, he was a professional farter, is the only way I could explain Danny Sutherland. Uh, Also, one of the best bass players ever in the world. The man was a goddamn genius. And there were so many stories about him literally clearing rooms, right, with farting. Because he was a big, heavy guy, and he made a sport out of it. And it was like, some people will be grossed out by that, and that's fine. But if you could have seen the man in action, it was so over the top, you had to laugh. There was no other point. There's no other option, right? So, to give you, I'm going to just tell a couple of stories because these are universal and people know about these stories. He told me this one himself, so one of his favorite things to do was a hit and run. He would literally pull his pants down and bend over and fart on you. That was, and you didn't know when this was going to happen. And then he'd laugh his ass off. And of course, you had to just laugh or throw up, one or the other. And so, this is a true story. This is, just going to warn you right now, this is really gross. But the way that he told it, and you can just imagine this happening with him. His family was at Easter dinner, and they're all dressed in suits. And his brother was leaving the dinner and got in his car. So Danny decided to give him a parting shot. And when his brother rolled the window down, Danny quickly spun around, dropped his pants, and tried to fart in the car window. But instead, he shit all over his brother. I mean, what world does this happen in, right? And of course, his brother got out of the car and chased him around the yard for 20 minutes trying to kill him. That one became a legend that he accidentally crapped on his brother, who was wearing his best Easter suit. And so another one that happened most people would look at this and go, that's not very funny, but I nearly died because it was so outrageous, right? We're playing at this fire hall out behind Antigonish, and the show was so sold out that they had to put up 2 full-size, like, circus tents out in front of the hall to hold the overflow of people. I don't know how many people showed up. It was like 1,500 people showed up at this this 400-seat fire hall. And of course, it was a fundraiser for the hall, but we were being paid really well for it. And there were all these dignitaries there, and the mayor of Antigonish showed up at soundcheck to meet me and to do whatever, all this politicking. And so we finished soundcheck, and we hadn't changed yet. And Danny was just wearing a T-shirt and cut-off gym pants or gym shorts, right? So I'm standing there with the mayor of Antigonish, and I don't even know who it was at the time, but standing there, Danny walks over and spins around and drops these gym shorts and blows this massive fart on me and the mayor of Antigonish, and then runs away. It was just one of those moments where you go, I can't believe that just happened. And the absurdity of it was priceless. I just about died. I couldn't stop laughing. I was sitting with the mayor, and I was trying to keep a straight face because he didn't know what to say. He just seen this guy on stage playing bass with us. And here he comes over and puts his bare ass out and farts on us. Like another time that we were on the road doing a contra dance tour that went all the way down to Tampa, Florida. And we ended up staying at one of these places we played. We stayed in this dilapidated kind of pioneer village thing. And we had this sort of a house, this old antique. It was really quite disturbing. This old house, like full of cockroaches and ants and bugs and scorpions, and it was in South Carolina somewhere or something. And we had our bedrooms were side by side, so his headboard was against our wall with our headboard. And after we were done everything we were doing, whatever, we all went to bed, and he kept standing up in the bed all night long and putting his bare ass against the wall and farting. And I every time he did this, I would just fucking lose my mind. And it got so bad that even Hilda started laughing because it was over the top. And he just had a really black sense of humor. He was just one of those guys, and I don't know. I miss him. He was so irreverent. And he was a respected man. He was a professor at St. FX in the jazz program. He turned out dozens of great players out of his program. And, it's so sad that he's gone. It is. As crazy as he was, just the sheer irreverence of him was, for me, a joy, but it was just not something you could take for many places. You had to be really careful who you introduced him to. He was what a player. What a player he was. Another guy in the mix as well during this time, an incredibly close friend of mine named Danny Maillet, out of Moncton, out of the bluegrass Maillets, Norm and Fern, and there's a whole Eddie Poirier. There's a whole crew of bluegrass players in Moncton that basically built the bluegrass scene in the East Coast for the most part of the past 50 years, And Danny was same age as me, and he went out, a tremendous guitar player, but he took a Fender Precision with him and played bass with us, and he got along with Hilda because, again, they both spoke French, and she loved his father. Everybody loved Fern, his dad, who was the bass player for the Bluegrass Four, and we laughed. We had a lot of laughs, but there was also some, well, here's a good story I'm going to just chuck in here because I just remembered it because it was really something. When I was younger, I think I believed more in the paranormal than I do now. But there was one thing that happened to me and to all. There's three of us, so we witnessed all of this ourselves. Nobody was, you know, messing around or drunk or anything like that. We all had a shared experience one time, and I remember this because it was just bizarre. We were playing up in a little place called Wakefield, Quebec, and the gig had a building attached to it, an old building that apparently I think used to be what they told me was used to be a military hospital. It was used for a military hospital at one time, like back in the War of 1812. That's how old this building was. And so we, instead of getting a hotel room somewhere around because it was hard to get a room in that area. It was very, very small area. There was no Holiday Inn on the corner. We decided to stay up in that building overnight. One time we played there. We played there multiple times, but this was the last time we ever stayed there. So this all sounds crazy, but it actually happened. We got up in there. Danny took a room down the hall. We took a room at the far end of the hall. The bathroom was in the hallway between us. And so here's all the things that happened during the night that we all talked about in the morning because we were pretty goddamn freaked out. Number one, Hilda went to the bathroom in the middle of the night and heard children giggling in the hallway. And then she went in the bathroom and turned the light on, and it wouldn't come on. And so I don't know how she managed to pee, but she did, maybe by maybe there was moonlight or something. And she jiggled the switch a couple times, and finally it came on. And so then she was coming back to the room. She left the bathroom light on in case anybody else wanted to find the room in the night. And as she was going back down the hallway, the light went off behind her. Now, mind you, there could have been a short in the wiring. It's an old building, whatever. Danny, he heard the children too. And his door kept opening all night. He'd hear the door open, and he'd look up, and the door would be open a couple inches, and he'd get up and close it and, check the latch. It was securely closed. Go back to bed. 15 minutes later, he'd hear the door open again, and he'd look up, and the door would be open 2 or 3 inches. Me, I had something completely freakish. I had a dream that I was a soldier, and they were amputating my left arm at the elbow. And it was a nightmare. They were doing it while I was awake, and it was a serious, serious nightmare that I didn't wake up from. You know how you have a nightmare and you wake up from it? I didn't wake up. I just switched into another dream that wasn't a nightmare. But when I woke up the next morning, I could not feel my arm from the elbow down, my left arm. I couldn't feel it at all. I could move it. It worked fine. Did everything I wanted it to do. But I could not feel a thing. And I panicked because we were on our way to another gig, and I looked at Hilda. I said, how the hell am I going to play if I can't feel my hand? Because I can't feel anything. I couldn't feel anything below the elbow. And we got in the car to leave to go to the next gig, which was probably about 300, 400 kilometers away. And the feeling in my arm literally came back the further we got away from that place. By the time we were 300 or 400 clicks up the road, it had very slowly faded away. The sensation of not numbness, just nothing. Couldn't feel it. So that freaked us out. That was a pretty freaky thing. Got not a lot of explanation for any of that, but they did tell us the place was haunted, and they were quite serious about it. And it was one of the reasons they didn't use it to accommodate anybody. That's what they told me. They said, no, we don't. People stay up there, but it says sometimes they have bad experience up there, and we don't like putting people in there, so we just don't do it. And so that was weird. and Danny, unfortunately, also, he witnessed a few pretty bad blow-ups between me and Hilda. I remember one time we were on our way up to a gig on the Quebec border in New Brunswick, and Hilda went off on something, and it just got so bad that we turned around, and or we didn't turn around. Actually, I think we did. We stopped at a hotel up around Moncton and just stayed the night, but I didn't. It was so bad that at one point Hilda had taken off, walking up the road going home. I don't know what she was doing. I had to go get her. She didn't want to come back to the motel. And I was like, no, you can't be doing this in the middle of the night. Like, don't be silly. Let's just all go back. And so I ended up actually that night. It got so bad that I actually stayed in Danny's room, and Hilda stayed by herself. And the next morning, I thought maybe we can. And Danny at that point looked at me and said, I'm going to have to quit this job because I can't handle this kind of shit. And I said, no, I don't blame you. So, and the next morning, I remember we got in the car, and I just said, well, I'm going home. Fuck the gig. I'll go home, and I'll drop you at Shetty Camp, and I'll go back and do it by myself, or Danny can come, or whatever. But I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to have these fights, on the road over nothing. That we need to be concentrating on the job. And so by the time I was back down the road an hour, she drew in her horns and said, I'm sorry. Let's not go home. Come on. And I made her sweat it for a while because I wanted her to know I was serious, and I was. I would have just driven back to Shetty Camp at that point because I was just tired. I wasn't angry. I wasn't mad at her. I was more angry at myself than anything. And I just wanted her to know that, and it straightened things out for a while. It actually did. She kind of sorted herself out, and so we went back and did the gig. But Danny didn't stay in the band. Again, guys that were talented enough to work with me didn't need to work for me. They could have done anything. They did the job with me because they loved my music and they liked me. Most of them were close friends of mine, but after a while, things would happen in my relationship, and it would just bleed out into everything and spoil the whole goddamn pot. And that happened over and over again. And some of it was my fault for, getting baited into arguments and discussions that were pointless. But everything has two sides. But anyhow, it always seemed to spoil the working relationship with anybody that was around us. So that's just some of the guys that went through the crew. There's more that I'll probably talk about next week. This will almost have to be a 2-part episode. But there's a lot more going on, too, besides just bass players cycling through. One of the reasons that I got involved with people like Mickey Quays and some other folks that we got involved with was because, you try to vet people you work for, and, Mickey was a great guy and still is. I love Mickey. But there's a certain amount of people's history and perceived history and all this stuff that comes into play. And Hilda was very, adamant about Mickey because Mickey worked with the Rankins, and that lent him a lot of credibility. He did a lot of great things for them, and that's going to come into play again. It happened several times, actually, and I suppose as the story goes on, start to see, things sort of didn't really change that much for me along this path until I decided to start making the decisions on my own and just, damn the torpedoes. Like, whatever happens. If she gets mad, she gets mad. And, but there was I was blessed with, Hilda was a great musician, and the guys that came in and worked with us were also world class. Um, as I've said before, it was difficult to change the sonics of our trio because the piano was so one-sided. Like there was so it's a any it doesn't matter who's really playing the piano. If they're doing it, they're just playing that one style. It backs you into a corner sonically, and so I had to get the best players I could get who understood how to get around Hilda's left hand, which was powerful and lots of bottom in it. And so subsequently, I worked with some of the best players you could ever find. Um, and I was goddamn lucky to have worked with them. And for them to have stayed on as long as they did with all the fucked up adverse, circumstances that were presenting themselves on a daily basis, whether it be, my shitpot marriage or the normal crap that goes on in the industry that every single person out here has to deal with on a daily basis. These guys were tough, man, and they played well, and they did their jobs regardless of what was happening. They just did the goddamn job. And I got to be proud of all of them, even Danny with his over enthusiastic flatulence. And but I mean, that's a tip of the iceberg. Some of the guys that were with us over the years, they were a real joy. They were a reprieve, I think, from when it was just me and Hilda on the road. It was difficult on me and probably her too, because we were just making each other so incredibly unhappy. There was no way to get around it. But, I thought to myself many times over the years, like, as many times as Chet got fired, I had to let that many people go. And how many people did Chet have to look at and go, not quite right for this project, or you're not quite right to get a record deal with RCA, or, any of those things, right? I talk about these things as if they're well, I don't. I try not to talk about them as if they're, special, specific to just me. It's everybody. This is what it is. And one of the reasons I'm glad to still be doing this series after almost 60 weeks now, and still not, quite through the story in the least. I want people to know this. I want people to understand how difficult this job is. That when they see a guy on stage for 90 minutes or 2 hours, whatever it is, at a show, man, they're seeing 1% of what it took to get there, to get on the stage and play the show. That's 1% of the man's life, or the woman's life, or the family's life. There's another 99% going on in the background there that is filled with tragedy and filled with hardship and good things and good times and a million laughs, and it's sadly just hidden from the audience, but mostly because the audience is purposely blind, because they don't want. That's the whole beauty of being an entertainer, is that it allows the audience to sit there and be entertained, where they're not thinking about their own problems, and they definitely don't want to think about the problems of the people on stage. So that's why that's why they call it performance. You go out and you perform and you act and you do what's necessary to do your job and connect with people, and try to keep it light and try to keep it about just that connection with the audience. And sadly, a lot of those audience members do want to know what's behind the curtain, right? And they never find out, because if they did, all that mystique and that facade that the performer puts up in front of them would go away. And a lot of performers are afraid of that, that they don't want to look human to the audience. They don't want to look like they have any problems, or that they have, and that's fine. That's perfect, because the vast majority of the audience doesn't want to know. But there is, in every musician's fan base, or whatever you want to call it, there's those who do want to know. And they want to know because they love you. They want to know because they're wondering, like, I wonder how much it took to get that one record made, or what was the process behind writing that song, or these things, right? And I think it's healthy now, especially now, that more artists talk about this. Because there's a story behind every single song, every single note ever played by anybody who does it for a living. There's a big, big story behind all of it. And I don't think you can go wrong talking about it now, especially now. I keep saying that, but the world has changed, and we have to make a closer connection to people, and this is the way I'm going to do it. Unfortunately, I'm not Chet Atkins. I can't do that kind of connection he did with just a guitar. Or maybe I could try. I don't know. But Chet was the man. And yeah, that was a milestone in my life when he left us. And yeah, what else you going to say? What else you going to say?